You know what they say about the quiet ones.
They remember everything.
And when the time comes, they don't make noise, they make waves. They say water always finds its level, that it's soft, yielding, weak. But they forget that water is also heavy, that it waits, that it remembers every stone thrown into it, every sin committed on its banks, until the day it decides to take it all back. This is the story of a woman they thought was empty,
a woman they drained dry.
But they didn't realize that when you drain a river, you don't get rid of the water. You just make the current angry. Mara used to believe love was a fortress, that if you gave someone your whole heart, they'd never pick up a sword and turn it against you.
That belief died the night Victor looked at her across a candlelit table scattered with roses and said, "You're a weight I can no longer carry." It was their 12th anniversary. The house glittered like a jewelry box, all polished surfaces and warm light. Music curled through the air like smoke, and the scent of expensive wine and designer perfume made everything feel surreal, almost beautiful. Victor had orchestrated every detail to perfection, or so Mara thought. She'd spent days planning the menu, testing recipes, pressing her best dress until it looked like new. She wanted one perfect night, a reminder of who they'd been before life got so loud and lonely. But when Victor took her hand that evening, his touch felt wrong, clinical, like a doctor examining a patient they didn't particularly care for. She'd seen that detachment before, just never aimed at her. "Is everything all right?" she'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper as champagne flowed and guests laughed a little too loudly. Victor flashed that camera-ready smile, the one that never quite reached his eyes.
"Perfect, darling.
Absolutely perfect. Tonight is important.
I want everyone to see how far we've come." She believed him.
Of course she did.
That's what love does. It blinds you just long enough to make the blade hurt more when it finally finds your back. When the toast began, Mara stood proudly at Victor's side, his arm draped around her waist like a familiar coat.
He raised his crystal flute, his voice smooth and practiced. "To my extraordinary wife," he said, each word landing like a caress. "The woman who stood by me when I had nothing but a dream and determination. You've given me everything." The crowd applauded. Mara blushed, warmth spreading through her chest. Then Victor set down his glass, turned to face her fully, and added, "And because you've given so much, you deserve complete honesty tonight." The room went silent. Mara's smile faltered. "Victor," what he cut her off with a gentle hand raised. "Mara and I have wanted a family for years. You all know this. But what you don't know is that she can't give me one." A ripple of shock moved through the guests. Someone gasped. Mara froze, her blood turning to ice. Victor's voice didn't waver.
"Once, we've seen every specialist, tried every treatment.
Nothing worked.
And I've realized something painful but necessary. It's time for me to stop pretending that hope is a strategy. I want children. I can't waste more years waiting for a miracle that's never coming."
The floor tilted beneath Mara's feet. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears.
"Victor, please."
"Not like this," but he continued, his tone soft enough to sound almost noble.
"Mara, you've been my partner, my confidant, my support. But this marriage has become a dead end.
I need a new beginning." That's when Lydia stepped forward. Mara's stomach twisted violently. Lydia, her best friend since university, the woman who'd cried genuine tears at their wedding, who'd held Mara's hand through every failed fertility treatment, emerged from behind the crowd. She was wearing Mara's necklace, the one Victor had given her on their 5th anniversary. A delicate gold chain with a single teardrop diamond that Mara had treasured. More than anything, Lydia's hand slid into Victor's like it belonged there. "I'm so sorry, Mara," she said, her voice trembling with what looked like pity but felt like poison.
"One day you'll understand.
We never planned this. It just happened."
The guests gasped again, louder this time.
Victor's arm went around Lydia's waist.
Mara couldn't move, couldn't breathe.
The air had thickened into something viscous, like she was drowning on dry land. Phones lit up around the room, cameras clicking, Someone already lives streaming her humiliation. Victor smiled for the lenses, as if this were just another publicity stunt. Then he delivered the line that would echo in Mara's mind for months. The line that would become the soundtrack to her sleepless nights. "You're nothing without me." Her knees nearly buckled. She turned to leave, but her own security team, the men she'd hired, whose salaries she'd paid, stepped in front of her. Victor had already removed her name from everything. The company, the house, the land. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford," one of them mumbled, unable to meet her eyes. "Mr. Ashford says you're no longer authorized on the premises, Mrs. Ashford." That title didn't even belong to her anymore. Not really. Victor leaned in close, his whisper colder than the rain that would soon soak her to the bone. "You can keep your sentimental trinkets. I've taken care of everything else. All of this is mine now." Mara's voice cracked. "You forged my father's land deeds. You made me sign papers you said were for taxes." Victor shrugged, his smile perfectly timed for the cameras still rolling. "Business, darling. You should have read the fine print." Lydia smirked, resting a manicured hand on Victor's chest. "Don't worry, Mara. We'll take excellent care of your memories." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Someone guided her toward the door. She didn't fight. What would be the point? Outside, rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, the sound of it on the marble steps blending with the rhythm of her own breaking heart. She didn't cry until she reached her car. Hours later, her belongings, what Victor had unlocked away, were dumped at the edge of the county road. 2 battered suitcases, a box of photographs, and her father's old toolbox. The driver wouldn't even look at her when he said, "Mr. Ashford said you'd know where to go." She did. The cabin by Blackwood Dam. Her father had built it decades ago as a storage shed for his equipment. It was small, damp, half forgotten by the world, but it was hers. The only piece of her life Victor couldn't touch. That night, she lit a fire and sat on the rough wooden floor, surrounded by the echo of her own breathing. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. She pulled out a framed photograph from the box, her and Victor smiling under the apple trees her father had planted when she was just a girl. She remembered that day. Victor had said, "This land will make us rich someday." She'd laughed, young and in love. "It already has. It gave us each other." Now those same apple trees were being torn down by bulldozers. She could hear in the distance their mechanical growls, a constant reminder of her lost. In the days that followed, Mara learned the true depth of Victor's betrayal. Every bank account was frozen. Every property document had been altered. The law firm that had handled her family's affairs for generations refused her calls. The lawyers were Victor's now too. When she went to the county clerk's office, she discovered the land transfer had been filed 6 months earlier, complete with her signature, except she'd never signed those pages. It was Graham, her brother, who finally told her the truth. He came to the cabin 2 weeks later, wearing an expensive suit and shoes so polished they reflected the sky shoes that didn't belong to the man who'd once helped their father mend fences and repair tractors. "Mara," he began, his voice heavy, with a guilt that sounded rehearsed. "I came to explain." She stared at him, her eyes hollow. "Explain what?" "How you sold me out for a corner office." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Victor offered me a position. You know how hard things have been since Dad passed." He said it was just business paperwork, that you'd already agreed to everything. "I didn't think." She cut him off sharply. "No, you didn't think. You signed away our father's legacy for a paycheck and a parking space. It's not like that." "It's exactly like that." Graham's shoulders slumped. "Look, you'll land on your feet. You're smart. You'll find someone else. Victor was never right for you anyway." The casual cruelty in his tone snapped something inside her. "Get out." He hesitated. "Mara, get out." He left without another word, closing the door gently as if he were leaving a hospital room instead of the only home she had left. That night, Mara walked outside. The air smelled of wet soil and diesel fuel from Victor's construction site. In the distance, floodlights from Olympus Estates burned through the mist, and the sound of engines and metal echoed across the valley as workers tore apart her father's orchard to make way for Victor's vision of paradise, a name that felt like mockery. She stood at the edge of Blackwood Dam, rain soaking her hair, her face, her clothes. The water below churned dark and deep, reflecting flashes of lightning. Her father once told her that land has memory, that it feels every footprint, every harvest, every storm. If the earth remembers every tear I've cried, she whispered into the wind, her voice breaking, then one day it will give them back. Thunder rolled in response, distant but heavy, like a promise of something inevitable. She didn't know it then, but that was the moment Mara stopped being broken and started becoming dangerous. The rain didn't stop for days. It was as if the sky itself wanted to mourn with her, weeping until the ground could hold no more. Mara stayed inside the cabin, surviving on canned soup and silence. She kept the curtains drawn because she couldn't bear to see the flashing construction lights across the valley. Every morning she woke to the sound of hammers, drills, and men shouting orders. They were building monuments to wealth on the graves of her memories. Each nail they drove into the earth felt like another wound. Sometimes she walked to the dam, just to watch. She'd stand there, arms folded, staring down at the water that ran through her father's land, now claimed by the man who'd destroyed her life. She told herself she just wanted to see it, to know how far they'd gone. But deeper down, something darker was forming, something that whispered every time she looked at the construction site. One day, they'll pay for this. Weeks passed. Victor's project grew with sickening speed. The bulldozers finished their work, clearing away the orchard where her father once taught her how to plant seeds and trust the seasons. Now foundations were being poured, bricks stacked in neat rows, and a shiny sign at the gate declared, Olympus Estates, a vision by Victor Ashford. It was almost laughable. Victor had always been ambitious. When they met, he was a struggling contractor who couldn't get a bank loan without Mara's credit and her father's land as collateral. She'd believed in him when no one else would. She'd stood beside him through every setback, every sleepless night, every shouting match with investors. She'd been his anchor, and he'd used that anchor to drown her. One afternoon, she heard a car approaching the cabin. She froze, instinctively pulling her threadbare cardigan tighter. When the car door slammed, she peeked through the curtain. Lydia, she looked different now, dressed in sleek white, her hair perfectly styled, oversized sunglasses hiding her eyes. A new luxury car sat behind her, glossy and expensive. Mara's throat tightened. Lydia stepped out, holding an umbrella, her heels clicking against the wet gravel. She looked around as if the place disgusted her. Then she spotted Mara at the window and smiled faintly, waving like they were old friends catching up over coffee. Mara didn't move. Lydia knocked once, then twice. Mara, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Mara opened the door halfway, her expression cold as stone. What could we possibly have to talk about? Lydia gave a soft, patronizing laugh. You're angry. I understand. But holding grudges won't help you heal. I came to offer you something. You came to offer me something, Mara repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. Lydia removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, glinting with the kind of confidence only cruelty can buy. Victor doesn't want you to suffer. He actually feels bad. Feels bad? Mara repeated, her voice shaking with restrained fury. He took everything from me, Lydia. He humiliated me in front of everyone we know. He forged my father's land deeds and stole my legacy. And you, her voice cracked, you stood beside him, smiling while he did it.
Lydia shrugged, the gesture so casual it was obscene. That's life, Mara. You had your chance. He wanted more, and you couldn't give it to him. More what? Money. Power. A family. Lydia's lips curled into a smug smile. Something you couldn't provide. Mara's hands trembled. Get off my land. Lydia's tone turned cold. Your land? You still believe that, don't you? Look around, Mara. It's not yours anymore. You're standing on borrowed ground. Mara stepped forward until they were inches apart. Her voice was low, calm, but there was a darkness behind it that made Lydia step back involuntarily. Everything he built on this earth, Mara said softly, one day it will fall. And when it does, I'll be there watching. Lydia smirked, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're pathetic. Mara smiled faintly. We'll see. Lydia turned on her heel and walked away, but not before calling over her shoulder. Victor said to tell you he's naming the first house after me. The Lydia. The words hung in the air long after her car disappeared down the muddy road. That night, Mara didn't sleep. She sat by the fire with her father's old photo album in her lap, turning pages slowly. Every picture told a lie she'd once believed. Their wedding day, their first home, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Victor's company. In every photo, his smile looked genuine. Now she saw it for what it was, a performance, a mask he'd worn even then. When dawn came, she walked to the dam again. The water was calm that morning, its surface still and glassy. She picked up a stone and tossed it in, watching the ripples spread wider and wider, disrupting the perfect reflection. For a long time, she stood there thinking about how Victor used to call her his lucky charm. How Lydia used to come over for dinner and compliment Mara's cooking, laughing too loudly at Victor's jokes. How the night Victor said, "You don't need to work. I'll take care of everything." He wasn't offering protection, he was taking control. Now she saw every small decision, every form she'd signed, every account he'd asked her to temporarily link to his business for what it was, a slow, careful setup, and she'd walked right into it. By noon, she packed a small bag and walked into Cedar Hollow. She needed to see things for herself. She stopped at the county clerk's office to request a copy of her land deed. The clerk behind the desk frowned, typing her name into an ancient computer. After a long pause, he said, "Ma'am, it shows here the property was transferred to Ashford Development 7 months ago. It's legally under their ownership now." Mara's stomach turned. "Can I see the signature?" He hesitated, then printed a page and slid it across the counter. Her name was there, scrawled in black ink, but it wasn't her handwriting. It was a forgery, clumsy but effective. Her fingers went numb as she stared at it until her vision blurred. "That's not mine," she whispered. The clerk looked uncomfortable. "If you believe it's a forgery, you can file a report, but—" She cut him off. "But Victor Ashford owns the county board, doesn't he?" The man didn't answer. He didn't have to. Mara walked out, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. On the street outside, people were laughing, shopping, living normal lives. She felt like a ghost moving among them, invisible and forgotten. When she got back to the cabin, the first thing she saw was a white envelope on the doorstep. No return address, just her name written in bold, familiar handwriting. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph, Victor and Lydia standing together at the construction site, smiling under a banner that read Olympus Estates, grand opening soon. Underneath, in neat handwriting, 3 words, "You're forgotten now." She stood there staring at the picture until the wind ripped it from her fingers. It fluttered into the dam's water and sank slowly beneath the surface, lost to the depths. That night, the storm returned. The wind howled through the valley, rattling the cabin's old windows. Mara sat up in bed, listening to thunder roll and rain crash against the roof. Then, through the noise, she heard something else, faint but clear. Laughter. She stepped outside and saw lights glowing across the valley. Victor and Lydia were hosting another party. Their laughter carried across the water like a cruel echo. She could see silhouettes moving, glasses raised, music pulsing. They were celebrating her erasure. She walked to the edge of the dam. The rain stung her face, soaking her hair until it clung to her skin like a second layer. Her reflection in the water looked nothing like the woman Victor had discarded. This version looked sharper, colder, alive in a different way. "If the earth remembers every tear I've cried," she whispered, "then one day it will give them back." The words hung in the air, swallowed by thunder. She stood there for a long time, staring into the dark water below, her eyes unblinking, her heart silent. The next morning, when the storm had passed, the sun rose over a valley washed clean. But But not everything had been washed away. Something had stayed behind, something steady, quiet, and unstoppable. In the days that followed, Mara stopped crying. She started watching. She learned the workers' schedules, the construction patterns, the layout of the new homes. She noticed where the water from the dam flowed when the gates opened, which parts of the valley sat lower than others, which foundations showed signs of stress. Every night she wrote things down in a small notebook: times, names, patterns, mistakes. Because when they took everything from her, they forgot one crucial thing: she knew this land better than anyone alive. 3 months after Victor threw her out, Mara came back into Cedar Hollow quietly. She walked down Main Street with her head high and her heart steady, carrying a small cleaning kit in one hand and a folder of references in the other. Nobody expected her to return, and those who noticed her whispered behind her back, "That's Victor Ashford's ex-wife. The one who lost everything. The one who couldn't give him children." She heard them, but she didn't react. Words couldn't cut her anymore. She'd already bled out everything that could hurt. Mara got work quickly, cleaning houses for families she used to host dinner parties for. The irony wasn't lost on her. She used to serve champagne to these same people. Now she scrubbed their floors and polished their silver. But she didn't mind. Work kept her mind quiet, kept her focused. Her first client was one of Victor's investors, a woman named Mrs. Langley. She lived in one of the newly finished houses at Olympus Estates. Mara kept her head down as she mopped the marble floors, but she couldn't help overhearing 2 guests in the living room. "I told Victor those retaining walls wouldn't hold through heavy rain," one man said, his voice low but urgent. "He's rushing the drainage work." Another voice laughed, but it was nervous. "He doesn't care about safety. He just wants those homes sold before the next inspection." Mara froze mid-wipe, her heartbeat quickening. She listened closer, pretending to wipe a side table that was already spotless. "The inspector's already been paid off," the man added. "Victor's got the whole department in his pocket. You think any of them will risk their cushy jobs?" Her stomach turned. It made sense now: Victor's speed, his arrogance, his absolute confidence that nothing could touch him. He was building on rotten ground, just like the lies he'd told. That night, back in her cabin, she wrote down what she'd heard. She'd started keeping records: dates, names, whispers, anything that felt important. At first, it was just a way to vent, but lately it had begun to feel like preparation. A week later, she took a cleaning job at her brother Graham's new house. She hadn't seen him since their argument, but she needed the work. He wasn't home when she arrived, only his housekeeper, who barely acknowledged her presence. Graham's house smelled of new money and guilt. Everything inside was sleek and polished: white walls and leather furniture, the kind of modern design that had no warmth, no soul. While dusting his office, Mara's attention caught on a half-open drawer. Inside were several files, a few marked with Victor's company logo. She knew she shouldn't, but something in her gut told her to look. She pulled out a small black ledger. It wasn't thick, but it was filled with numbers and signatures. As she flipped through it, her eyes widened. Loans. Transfers. Names she recognized from Victor's projects. And then she saw it, her own name. M. Ashford, listed as guarantor on several high-value loans. Her father's land deed had been used as collateral to secure Victor's construction money. Every house, every dollar, every brick built on that land had come from her signature, her trust, her name. Her throat went dry. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She took photos of every page with her phone, slipped the ledger back where she found it, and left before Graham came home. Outside, the wind had picked up again, brushing her hair into her face. She looked back at the glowing houses of Olympus Estates and whispered, "You built your empire on me, Victor. On my land, my name, my blood. I hope it remembers." A few days later, she met Silas. She was walking near the dam, carrying groceries, when she saw a truck parked by the control shed. A man stood near the water, clipboard in hand, watching the current with quiet focus. He was in his mid-30s, tall, wearing a city engineer's jacket. His face looked weathered in a kind way, like someone who'd seen too much but still chose to do good. He turned when he heard her footsteps. You shouldn't be this close to the edge. The ground's soft after all that rain. I know this dam better than I know myself, she replied. He smiled faintly. Then you know how dangerous that is. She tilted her head. You're not from the company. Victor doesn't hire people who sound like they care. That made him laugh, just a little. I don't work for him. Name's Silas Cole. I'm with the city engineering department. We're doing routine safety checks. Routine, she repeated. That's funny. Victor hasn't allowed any inspections for years. His expression shifted, became more serious. That's what worries me. They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the water. Finally, Silas spoke quietly. This dam was never meant to hold back this much pressure. And with all the construction he's added downstream. He trailed off, shaking his head. If something goes wrong, it won't just be property damage. Mara's pulse quickened. You mean lives? He nodded. I've been trying to get access to the maintenance records, but his company claims they're confidential. Someone's covering up missing funds. The dam's budget's been drained for years. Drained, she said softly, almost to herself. That sounds about right. He glanced at her, studying her face. You've lost something because of him, haven't you? Mara met his eyes and for the first time in months didn't flinch. Everything. He nodded slowly, not asking for details. Then maybe we can help each other. That night, Mara thought about Silas's words. A man investigating Victor for missing funds, for safety violations, for lies buried under cement and steel. It felt like the first crack in Victor's perfect wall. She began spending more time near the dam, pretending to walk or collect firewood, but always watching. Sometimes she found Silas there, studying reports, muttering numbers to himself. He wasn't talkative, but his silence wasn't cold. It was thoughtful, purposeful. One afternoon, she asked him why he cared so much. My dad used to work maintenance here, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the water. He died when I was a kid. Official reports said it was an accident, a gate malfunction. But later, I found out Victor's first company handled the repair contracts that year. They cut corners, didn't replace the safety parts. Mara felt a chill run through her. You think your father's death was Victor's fault? I don't think, Silas said. I know. From that moment, something shifted between them. It wasn't friendship yet, but an understanding. Two people broken in different ways by the same man. As the weeks passed, Mara's resolve hardened. She no longer saw herself as a victim. She was a witness, collecting truth. Every whispered complaint she overheard while cleaning, every document she secretly copied, every suspicious payment Silas uncovered, it all began to form a pattern. And Victor's pattern always ended the same way, greed covered in a thin veneer of charm. By early summer, Victor's company was in overdrive. New homes were being advertised everywhere, with Lydia's face plastered across billboards. She'd become the brand, the new Mrs. Ashford, the face of Olympus Estates. One evening, Mara stopped at the cafe after work. On the TV mounted above the counter, Lydia's latest video played. The clip showed her walking through one of the new luxury kitchens, laughing, holding up a sparkling diamond ring, Mara's old wedding ring. You can't steal what someone threw away, Lydia said into the camera, her smile perfect and poisonous. Some of us just know how to make use of things others couldn't handle. The customers laughed. The video cut to a shot of Victor kissing Lydia's forehead as reporters snapped photos. Mara's hands clenched around her coffee cup until it cracked, hot liquid spilling over her fingers. People in the cafe noticed her, but pretended not to. She stood, dropped a few bills on the counter, and walked out without a word. That night, she didn't sleep again. She sat by the window, the glow from Olympus Estates flickering in the distance. She could almost hear Lydia's laughter echoing across the valley. And somewhere below that laughter, she could hear the faint groan of the dam's walls. Something was shifting in the land, in the water, in her. The next few days passed quietly, but not peacefully. Something had changed inside Mara. The pain that once hollowed her out had become something sharper, something focused. She started watching Victor's empire like a hunter studying prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. She kept working as a cleaner, but her eyes were always open. Olympus Estates had grown into a small city of mansions now, 10 homes lined like trophies along the ridge, each one featuring Victor's signature design. Massive glass walls, marble patios, imported stone that gleamed in the sunlight. To everyone else, it looked like a triumph. To Mara, it looked like a monument to stolen lives. She noticed the smallest details, the way puddles never drained properly after rain, how hairline cracks began forming near the walkways, how workers argued in hushed, anxious voices before Victor arrived for his photo opportunities. Every week she filled pages of her notebook with notes, sketches, observations. It was her private record of the lies he'd built on her land. One afternoon, while cleaning another investor's house, she overheard 2 contractors talking in the kitchen. They thought she was out of earshot. "Did you see the cracks behind Lot 7? One said. "Those retaining walls are shifting." "Yeah, but keep quiet. Mr. Ashford doesn't want any reports filed. He says the soil's stable." "Stable my ass," the man muttered. "That dam breaks, half this development's underwater." Mara froze in place, heart pounding. They left a minute later, and she slipped outside, her mind racing. She walked to the edge of the property and looked down toward the dam. From up here, she could see faint lines on the earth, like veins running beneath the surface. Maybe no one else noticed, but she did. She'd grown up walking that slope. The ground was sinking. That evening, she went to find Silas. He was standing near the dam again, clipboard in hand, brow furrowed. The wind carried the smell of wet clay and rust. When he saw her, he nodded slightly as if he'd been expecting her. "I heard the contractors talking," she said, breathless. "They said the foundation behind Lot 7 is shifting." Silas sighed, flipping through his notes. "I know. I've been tracking small movements in the soil for weeks. It's worse than they're reporting." "Then stop them," she said. "Report it. Shut the project down." He looked up at her, his eyes tired. "You think I haven't tried?" "The moment I mentioned an independent inspection, my supervisor got a call from Victor Ashford. Next day, my access was restricted. He's got everyone bought." Mara's jaw tightened. "There has to be something we can do." Silas hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Mara, I found something. You might want to see this." He pulled a folder from his bag and handed it to her. Inside were photos of cracks along the dam's base, barely visible unless you knew where to look. They were thin, hairline fractures, but there were dozens of them. "These weren't here last year," Silas said. "And the maintenance budget for repairs? Gone. The city sent funds to Ashford Development to handle the upkeep. The money vanished. And the reports say all systems stable." "Someone forged those documents," Mara whispered. Her hands trembled slightly as she looked through the pages. "He's risking lives." "He doesn't care," Silas said softly. "To him, it's all numbers. As long as he keeps selling homes, he'll pretend nothing's wrong." Mara stared at the photos again, her pulse steady but her voice cold. "Then maybe we stop pretending too." He studied her for a long moment. "What are you planning?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes, that calm, frightening resolve. He reached out gently. "Mara, be careful. I've seen what revenge does to people. Don't let him turn you into what he is." She met his gaze. He already did. The next morning, Mara was cleaning Graham's house again. He wasn't home, but his phone kept buzzing on the table. When she glanced at the screen, she saw a message from Victor. "Keep those files locked. She can't find out about the loans." Her stomach clenched. There were more secrets, more lies buried somewhere she hadn't uncovered yet. She looked around his office and noticed a small safe behind the desk. She didn't need to open it to know what was inside. It was the kind of silence that told the truth. When Graham finally returned, she didn't say a word about what she'd seen. She finished her work, gathered her supplies, and left. The time for confrontation would come later. That evening, the sunset stretched red and gold across the valley, casting Olympus Estates in a warm glow that made it look almost beautiful. Almost. Mara stood on her porch watching as Lydia's new video popped up on her phone feed again. Lydia was filming herself at the grand opening of another house, her voice sugary sweet. "Success is built on courage," Lydia said into the camera. "And sometimes letting go of the past is the best thing a woman can do." Mara's thumb hovered over the screen before she shut it off. The irony burned, but she didn't react. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was patience. Later that night, Silas came by the cabin. His face was tense. "I need to show you something," he said quietly. They walked together to the dam, flashlights cutting through the dark. He led her down to a narrow maintenance path she hadn't used in years. The air was thick with dampness. When they reached the base, he shone the light across the concrete. The cracks were worse than before, thin at first, but deeper the closer they got to the waterline. "How long do we have?" Mara asked. "Months. Maybe less." Silas's voice was grave. "If the rainy season hits hard, the pressure will break through the weak points. And guess what's sitting right in its path? Olympus Estates." Mara stared at the fractures, her jaw tight. The idea of Victor's glittering empire sinking under the weight of his own greed felt like justice whispered by the earth itself. Silas turned to her. "If this dam goes, it won't just hit his homes. People in town could get hurt too." She looked at him, her voice steady. "Then maybe we make sure they know before it happens." He frowned. "You're talking about exposing him?" "I'm talking about showing people what kind of man he really is." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll help. But Mara, whatever you're thinking beyond that, don't. You don't want to lose yourself." She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out over the dark water, its surface rippling faintly. "Do you think the land remembers?" she murmured. "What do you mean?" "My father used to say the land remembers who loves it and who uses it. Victor used it. I loved it. Maybe it's finally choosing sides." Silas said nothing. He just watched her. And maybe for the first time, he saw what Victor had really created. Not a broken woman, but something stronger, quieter, and far more dangerous. The next few days moved like clockwork. Mara continued her routine, working, watching, waiting. Rumors of leaks near the dam began to spread through the workers. Some whispered that Victor was ignoring warnings, others that he'd paid off officials to stay quiet. The lies were catching up faster than he realized. Then one morning, a package arrived at Mara's doorstep. No return address, just her name handwritten in black ink. Her pulse quickened as she tore it open. Inside was a photograph, Victor and Lydia standing at the estate's front gate, smiling proudly under a banner that read Olympus Estates, grand opening soon. At first, it looked just like any of the dozens of photos they'd taken for the press. But as Mara looked closer, she noticed something faintly scrolled across the bottom in red ink, not printed but written by hand. "You still own the floodgates." She stared at the words for a long time, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She looked out the window toward the dam, where the water shimmered under the evening light. Somewhere deep in her chest, something that had been quiet for months began to stir again. Mara didn't sleep the night she received the letter. She sat by the window until dawn, staring at the dam, tracing every shadow with her eyes. "You still own the floodgates." The words spun through her mind like a haunting melody that refused to fade. By morning, she had one goal: find out the truth. She met Silas at the edge of the dam that afternoon. He was kneeling near the control shed, checking readings on a small device when she arrived. He looked up, surprised by the determination etched into her face. "I need to know something," she said, skipping any greeting. "When Victor took my land, what exactly did he take?" He straightened, brushing off his hands. "The property deed, the development rights, everything tied to the parcels listed in the transfer." "Why? What about the dam?" she asked. "My father built it before Victor came along. It wasn't technically part of the farmland. It was classified as private infrastructure tied to my family's estate." Silas frowned. "You think he took that too?" "I don't think he could," Mara said. "My father's will made me the trustee for anything connected to water access. It was one of his conditions because the dam fed the town's lower irrigation system." Silas's eyes narrowed. "If that's true, it would still be under your name in public records." "Then we check," she said. They drove into town, the truck bouncing along the dirt road. The municipal building was quiet that afternoon, the air thick with the smell of paper and stale coffee. Mara hadn't set foot there since before the divorce. Her hands trembled as she signed her name on the access request form. The clerk disappeared into the back for what felt like forever, then returned with a dusty folder. Mara opened it carefully, her breath catching as she flipped through the pages. The first line stopped her cold. Property title, Blackwood Estate, water access and infrastructure rights. Sole owner, Mara Ashford. Her name was still there. Not a trace of Victor's company anywhere near it. Silas leaned closer, scanning the legal notes. Look at this clause, he said, pointing. It says here, the dam and its control system are independent of the main property. It's governed under separate water rights and cannot be transferred without explicit authorization from the listed trustee. Mara exhaled slowly. That's me. He looked at her with something between disbelief and admiration. Mara, this means he never owned the dam. He might have stolen the land around it, but legally you still control the floodgates. Her pulse quickened. He's built everything downstream, hasn't he? Every house, every road, every promise. On your water, Silas said quietly. Without it, Olympus Estates doesn't exist. She laughed softly, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then maybe the land's been waiting for me all along. They left the office in silence, the weight of the discovery sinking in like thunder before a storm. As Silas dropped her off, he hesitated before driving away. Whatever you're planning, he said, make sure it's for more than revenge. Mara looked toward the dam. Don't worry, she murmured. It's for justice. The next step was Graham. If Victor was the thief, Graham was the willing accomplice, and she needed him to talk. So Mara swallowed her pride and dialed his number. He didn't answer the first time, but she kept trying until he finally picked up. Graham, she said softly. I think we need to stop fighting. I miss my brother. There was silence on the line before he exhaled heavily. You sound different. I am, she said. Can we meet? I just want to talk. They met the next morning at a cafe near the courthouse. He arrived in a crisp suit, looking uncomfortable to be seen with her, like guilt had become his permanent accessory. You look good, he said awkwardly, stirring his coffee. Better than I expected. She smiled faintly. I'm surviving. That's something. He nodded, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. What did you want to talk about? I just want to understand what happened, she said. The paperwork, the transfers. Victor said everything was above board, but I know you were handling the documents. You wouldn't have helped him unless you thought it was safe. Graham shifted uncomfortably. Mara, don't make me relive this. You wouldn't understand. I want to, she said, leaning closer. Please. He rubbed the back of his neck, sighing. Fine. Victor's company was under pressure. Environmental reviews, drainage reports, all that bureaucratic nonsense. The inspectors were going to shut the project down, so he revised some of the data. Mara's voice tightened. He falsified the reports. Graham didn't meet her eyes. We all did. The documents said the dam was stable, the runoff area is safe. But we knew there were leaks forming under the main spillway. Victor said it was temporary. He'd fix it once the houses sold. He laughed bitterly. You know how he is. Everything's about appearance. Mara's stomach turned. He's building over cracks. Don't act surprised, Graham snapped. You were married to him. You know he never cared about rules. She studied him for a long moment, then softened her tone in a way that made him relax. Graham, I forgive you. He blinked, startled. You what? I said I forgive you. You made a mistake, but you're still my brother. He didn't notice the tiny recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. That night, Mara played the recording back over and over. Graham's confession filled the cabin like a ghost, his voice admitting everything Victor had done to cheat the system, to cheat her. It was the first real proof she'd held in her hands. She sent a copy to Silas. His reply came within minutes. This is enough to start an official review. But be careful, Mara. If Victor finds out you're behind this, he'll come for you. She smiled faintly at her phone. Let him try. The following week, news broke online. A leaked video of Victor arguing with Lydia in a restaurant. Mara hadn't meant to smile when she saw it, but she did. The clip spread like wildfire, shared by gossip accounts and local reporters hungry for a scandal. In the video, Lydia slammed her phone on the table. "You're disgusting, Victor." "You think I wouldn't find out?" Victor leaned back, unbothered. "Find out what?" "You and that investor's wife. You're sleeping with her." The restaurant fell silent. Cameras caught every second. Victor stood, his voice sharp. "You're embarrassing yourself." Lydia, furious and heavily pregnant, shoved the phone in his face. "Don't you dare play innocent with me." He grabbed her wrist. "You were just a prettier version of Mara," he hissed, "until you got fat." The gasp from the room was audible. Someone filmed the whole thing. By morning, it had gone viral. The headlines were merciless. Victor Ashford explodes on pregnant fiancé. Sponsors began pulling out. His investors panicked. For Mara, it was the first time she'd tasted satisfaction in a long while. But there was one thing she hadn't expected, Lydia calling her. The phone rang that evening. Mara almost ignored it, then picked up. "Mara." Lydia's voice was shaky, not the sharp mocking tone she remembered. "I'm surprised you'd call," Mara said flatly. "I had to. You were right. Everything you said about him, it's all true. He's cruel." Mara stayed silent. Lydia's voice cracked. "He used me. I thought I was the exception, but I was just the next one. I'm so stupid." Mara's tone softened only slightly. "You made your choice, Lydia. I know. And I'll pay for it forever. But you need to know something." Mara's pulse quickened. "What?" "Victor never filed our marriage papers. He said he did, but I checked. I'm not legally his wife." "I'm nothing." Mara froze. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, everything he owns, the land, the homes, they're still registered under Ashford Development, which falls under your original estate. He never fixed the titles. You still own the land, Mara. Every inch of it." The line went quiet for a moment, only the sound of Lydia's shaky breath on the other end. Mara whispered, "He built his empire on my property." Lydia's voice broke. "And now it's falling apart." Later that night, Mara drove out to the dam alone. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, the clouds swollen and dark. She stood by the railing, watching lightning flicker across the valley. The water below churned like something alive, restless. Her reflection stared back at her, calm and unflinching. She whispered, "You built your heaven on my tears. Let's see if it floats." Thunder answered her. The first drops of rain began to fall. The storm raged all night, a living thing tearing through the valley. Rain came in waves, crashing against the dam and clawing at the glass towers of Olympus Estates. The air itself felt electric, humming with a fury that had been building for years. Mara's fury, finally finding its shape in the sky. Down below, the 10 luxury homes glowed like candles in the dark. Music floated up through the rain. Victor's party, loud and proud, cutting through thunder as if he could out nature itself. Inside the largest house, Victor stood at the center of a glittering crowd, drink in hand, suit immaculate. Lydia hovered near him, silent, her eyes hollow. She looked worn, swollen from pregnancy, no longer the bright trophy he paraded around. He didn't notice her. He never did. "Tonight," Victor announced, his voice booming over the storm outside, "we celebrate vision, courage, and success." He raised his glass as lightning flashed through the windows. "Olympus Estates stands as proof that nothing can tear down what we build." The crowd cheered, half drunk, half dazzled. They didn't see the walls trembling with the vibration of distant thunder. They didn't see the water rising inch by inch at the property's edge. But Mara did. She stood on the dam's upper walkway, drenched, her coat whipping in the wind. The lever was cold beneath her palm. The storm roared around her, the wind tearing at her clothes, but she didn't move. Her mind was as clear as the floodwaters below, powerful, steady, unstoppable. She opened the first floodgate. Not all the way, just enough. A surge of water burst through the spillway, rushing down the valley like a living scream. It tore through the lower roads, overwhelmed the inadequate drains, and sliced across the base of Olympus Estates. Lights flickered. Sirens began to wail. Mara watched the wave hit the edges of the estate, swallowing the lowest gardens. She wasn't trying to kill. Not yet. This was a warning, the kind Victor couldn't ignore. Inside the mansion, guests screamed as water pushed against the glass walls. Victor's investors stumbled toward the exits, shouting into phones, tripping over furniture. Lydia clutched her stomach, crying out for help. Victor didn't move at first. He stood staring at the flood outside, disbelief painted across his face. "It's just run off," he muttered. "It'll pass." But when the floor shuddered underfoot and a chandelier crashed to the ground, even he began to panic. "Get everyone out," he barked at the staff, his voice finally cracking. "Shut the gates. Block the water." Graham burst into the room, soaked to the skin. "The retaining walls are giving way," he shouted. "You've got to call emergency services." Victor turned on him. "You told me this place was safe." "I told you we needed more time. You wanted it open before the inspectors came back." Their shouting was drowned out by the sound of the foundation cracking. Furniture slid across marble floors as water forced its way inside. Up on the hill, Mara watched, expressionless. She could see flashes of panic, headlights cutting through the dark as cars tried to escape. The flood had reached their driveways. Olympus Estates was no longer a paradise. It was a sinking island. Her phone buzzed. Silas. She let it ring once, twice, then answered. "What did you do?" His voice was full of fear. "I warned him," she said calmly. "You opened the gates, didn't you, Mara? That dam can't take much more pressure." "It's not about the dam," she said quietly. "It's about him." "Listen to me," he said urgently. "If this keeps going, you won't be able to control it. You'll destroy everything, even your own land." She looked at the rising torrent below. "Maybe some things need to be destroyed." She ended the call. Inside the mansion, chaos had become hysteria. Water poured down the grand staircase, dragging rugs and furniture with it. Guests climbed onto tables, clutching their phones, screaming for help that wasn't coming. Lydia was sitting on the floor, shaking, her hand pressed to her belly. "Victor, we have to go," she cried. He ignored her, shoving past people toward the main window. "It's not possible," he muttered. "This dam can't fail." He turned on Graham again. "Call Mara. She has to know something about this." Graham's eyes widened. "Mara? You think she—" Victor grabbed his collar. "You don't get it. That dam was hers. She's the only one who could have." Then he froze. Outside, under the flash of lightning, he saw her. Mara stood on the dam's walkway, silhouetted against the storm, coat whipping in the wind. For a moment, it was like seeing a ghost, the ghost of every mistake he'd made, every lie he'd told, every life he'd broken. His voice dropped to a whisper. "No!" The flood alarm screamed louder. Lydia tried to stand, slipping in the water. "Victor, we have to leave." He turned toward her, furious. "You think she scares me? She's nothing." But even as he said it, his voice cracked. The walls groaned. A section of the lower foundation gave way, sending another rush of water through the property. Graham ran for the door, shouting at Lydia to follow, but Victor stayed rooted to the spot, watching Mara across the valley, watching the storm itself bend to her will. At the dam, Silas appeared out of the darkness again, soaked and desperate. "Mara," he shouted over the roar of water. "You need to close it before it's too late." She turned to face him, calm despite the chaos. "It's already too late." "No." He grabbed her shoulders. "You can still stop this. You've already won, Mara." He's finished. Look at him. The investors are gone. The town knows the truth. "This isn't about the town," she said quietly. "This is between me and the land he violated." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking the ground beneath them. A spray of cold water hit their faces as the dam trembled under the strain. "Please," Silas said, his voice breaking. "If you do this, it's not justice anymore. It's vengeance." She stared past him, her eyes locked on the glow of Olympus Estates below. Maybe vengeance is what justice looks like when it finally stops apologizing. Silas stepped back, realizing he couldn't reach her through words. She turned again toward the floodgates. Down below, she saw Lydia's car stuck halfway on the hill road, water climbing the tires. Lydia was inside, pounding on the glass, trapped by the current. Mara froze. The rain blurred everything except that sight, a terrified woman screaming for help. The same woman who'd once laughed while Mara's world burned. For a heartbeat, Mara did nothing. The flood roared louder, the dam walls shivering under the weight of choice. Then she ran. Silas shouted her name, but she didn't stop. She raced down the slippery path, mud and rain soaking her legs. When she reached the car, the water was waist-high. Lydia's eyes were wide with panic. "Mara, please." Without hesitation, Mara wrenched the door open against the pressure. The current nearly swept her off her feet. She grabbed Lydia's arm and pulled with all her strength. Together, they stumbled through the water until Silas reached them, hauling Lydia the rest of the way up the slope. By the time they reached safety, both women were shaking, gasping for breath. Lydia fell to her knees, sobbing. Mara stood silently beside her, watching the homes below collapse under the surge. Olympus Estates was gone, swallowed whole by the very water Victor had claimed to control. From across the valley came the sound of sirens, flood response units, reporters, chaos. Mara didn't move. She just stared down at the ruins as the storm began to quiet, the sky slowly fading to gray. Silas stood beside her, breathing hard. "You saved her." Mara didn't answer. "You could have let her die," he continued. "But you didn't." Finally, she turned toward him. Her eyes were calm. "I wasn't saving her," she said. "I was saving myself." The wind carried away her words, and for the first time in years, she felt something strange, not joy, not victory, but release. The storm had broken. So had she in the best possible way. Down below, Victor stood in knee-deep water, his house in ruins. Reporters' cameras flashed even as police pulled him away in handcuffs. His empire was gone, his mask shattered. The flood had done what no one else could. It had stripped him bare. And Mara watched it all from the hill, her coat still dripping, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to celebrate. The land had spoken for her. The morning after the flood, the valley looked like the end of the world. Mud covered everything. Fallen branches and shattered beams floated where roads used to be. The once glittering homes of Olympus Estates lay broken and half-submerged, their marble and glass cracked open like eggshells. The air was heavy with silence, the kind that follows screaming. Rescue teams worked for hours pulling people from wreckage. Some houses were completely gone, others stood leaning, skeletons of what they'd been. Mara sat on a rock near the dam, wrapped in a blanket one of the responders had handed her. She hadn't said a word since they'd found her and Silas. The officers had asked questions, but Silas answered them all, keeping her out of it as much as he could. He told them she was a witness, not a cause. A survivor, not a suspect. She just stared out at the flooded valley, eyes dry and distant. When the officers finally moved on, Silas crouched beside her. "It's over," he said softly. She nodded, but didn't look at him. "Is it?" "Victor's finished," Silas said. "The investigators already found the forged reports. The city's pressing charges for embezzlement, insurance fraud, environmental violations. It's all coming down on him." A faint, tired smile flickered across her face. "He built everything on lies. I guess they couldn't float." Silas didn't laugh. He just watched her carefully. "They'll probably want to talk to you again about the dam, the floodgates." She finally looked at him. "You think I caused it?" "I think you could have," he said quietly. "But you didn't. You opened it just enough. You warned them." She nodded, staring at the water again. "That's all I ever wanted. To be heard." The court hearings went on for weeks. Evidence piled up: stolen funds, bribed officials, forged reports, safety violations that had been covered up with money and threats. Graham testified early on, his voice shaking as he admitted to helping Victor falsify documents. He couldn't look at Mara once. Lydia arrived late, pale and quiet, heavily pregnant. She sat behind the prosecution table, not as a defendant but as a witness. The press tore her apart, but she didn't fight back. She had her own punishment to live with. Victor tried to shift the blame to everyone else, first his staff, then his brother-in-law, then finally Mara. In a last desperate move, he claimed she'd opened the floodgates deliberately to destroy his business. The courtroom gasped. Mara sat calmly in the front row, hands folded. She didn't react. She didn't need to. Silas took the stand next. He presented the inspection data, the financial records, the maintenance logs, every proof that Victor's negligence had caused the disaster. When the judge asked him directly, could this flood have been prevented? Silas said yes, if Victor Ashford hadn't ignored safety warnings for profit. The defense went silent after that. By the end of the trial, the verdict was clear: Victor Ashford, guilty on all counts. As officers led him away, he turned toward Mara one last time. His voice was low, but the bitterness in it reached across the courtroom. "You think you won?" he hissed. "Everything I built was yours anyway. You just didn't have the guts to claim it." Mara didn't even blink. "You're right," she said softly. "But I found something better to build." Weeks passed. The floodwaters receded, leaving behind scars, but also clarity. The town began rebuilding. The government took over the damaged lands, promising stricter regulations. Mara's name was cleared entirely. Her father's estate was reinstated. Graham left town quietly. No one saw him go. Lydia stayed. She gave birth to a daughter on a calm Sunday morning. When Mara visited the hospital weeks later, Lydia looked fragile, but there was a gentleness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The baby slept in her arms, small and peaceful. "I named her Grace," Lydia said softly. "Grace Mara." Mara blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." Lydia smiled weakly. "Yes, I did. Because if it weren't for you, neither of us would be here. I know you didn't do it to save me, but you did anyway." Mara looked down at the baby. Grace's tiny hand curled around her finger, and for the first time in years, something warm bloomed in her chest. Something close to forgiveness. "She'll never know what we did wrong," Mara said quietly. "Only what we did right after." Months later, spring returned to the valley. The orchard land that had once held Victor's empire was green again, the soil fresh from rain and renewal. Mara had rebuilt part of the property, not with glass and marble, but with purpose. Where the main house once stood, now rose a community center made of reclaimed wood and stone. It wasn't grand. It wasn't shiny. But it was alive. Children ran through the gardens where the floodwaters had once raged. Families displaced by the disaster worked side by side, planting trees, building benches, repainting walls. At the far edge of the property stood a memorial garden, small plaques engraved with the names of those who'd lost homes, businesses, loved ones in the storm. The last plaque bore a single name: Victor Ashford. Silas had helped her build it. He stood beside her now, hands in his pockets, looking out at the calm water that once threatened to swallow everything. "You could have left," he said quietly. "Started somewhere new." Mara smiled faintly. "I don't want new. I want home." He nodded, watching her as she stepped closer to the edge of the dam. The water shimmered beneath the sun, still and quiet now, reflecting the sky like glass. Mara spoke softly, almost to herself. "Funny thing about water, it remembers. Every drop that falls here knows where it came from. And one day, it always finds its way back." She turned to Silas. "People are like that too." He smiled gently. "So, where do you go from here?" She looked out at the horizon, the valley reborn under golden light. "Forward," she said. "But I'll let the past rest where it belongs. Under the water." As the wind moved through the valley, carrying the faint laughter of children and the rustle of new leaves, Mara stood at its center, not victorious, not vengeful, but whole. The land had remembered her, and she had finally remembered herself. "They built mansions on my pain," she thought. "I built peace on their ruins." Revenge doesn't shout. It flows quietly, like water. And one day, it finds its way home. The camera of memory would pull back then, the dam gleaming in the distance, the garden blooming over once broken ground, the river flowing gently through the heart of everything that survived. Mara stood at its center, her reflection clear in the water, her heart finally at rest. The valley had healed. So had she.